Hey, church family and others. Thank you for tuning in tonight as we kind of continue this talk on Stronger Together. Just conversations around, race and racism and all the issues that are facing our world right now. I mean, it is pretty crazy. We've been about 52 days since George Floyd's death, and I mean, there's still protests going on, and obviously, these are some really big issues in our world today. And so, kind of to bring a little bit younger perspective to the conversation that we've been having, we grabbed some younger people from our church and our community to kind of help facilitate that conversation today. Lindsay Joshlin is actually going to be the one who will be sort of moderating, and but Brian and I are here to just kind of partake and be wallflowers, as really our goal is to just hear and understand. um there's a tendency to always want to offer easy solutions to very, very complex problems, and honestly it really starts with just caring and just listening. So that's really our goal for today. We do thank you guys. I want to let you introduce yourselves as we kind of get into the first questions. I did want to say we will be having 2 more weeks of this. Next week, we're going to talk about it in regard to sort of a pastoral theological perspective. We're going to have a panel of a couple different pastors on to discuss it. And then the 5th week, we will be actually taking questions emailed in or sent in by Facebook, whatever, to us. And I will say, we are well aware that this is a very scary and difficult topic. There is a tremendous amount of emotional baggage behind, well, almost any side in any way they're talked about. So if you would like to email me, ton@hillspringtc.org, you can send in any question you want, and I will not be putting people's names to the questions that are out. And we will hold that carefully. And now there may be questions asked that I won't bring up, but you are welcome to ask hard questions, and that'll be held anonymously. So on however that goes. So keep that in mind, and please feel free to message me on Facebook or email me at ton@hillspringtc.org. With that, we'll go ahead and turn this over to Lindsay, and you can kind of tell us who you are and get us going.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here tonight just to join in on this conversation, help facilitate this conversation. My name is Lindsay Joshlin, and I was on the staff at Hillspring until my son was born a year ago, February. So I'm sure there are many familiar faces out there that I can't see right now, but I'm happy just to be here and again, just continue this conversation that we've been having over the last couple of weeks. We do have lots to talk about in a pretty short period of time. So I just want to jump right in, and I'm going to ask each one of you this first question. So
actually, I just realized I forgot something.
Okay.
If you guys are on Facebook talking about how there's people out there, feel free to put in your comments and your questions, and I'll try and interject them as that flows. And also keep in mind, these are people who are tied to our church and connected to our community, but this is not an official anything from our church. Like, this is what we believe and what we all have to agree to. So anyway, sorry for interrupting, but go ahead.
No, you're good. And exactly, everyone's sharing, part of our goal is sharing personal stories, sharing from your own experience tonight. So, Josie, if we could start with you, have you experienced racism either personally or witnessed it? And if so, can you tell us about maybe your first memory, your first experience with that?
Well, first, thank you for having me. This is an incredible platform for me to be able to share my story of things that I've experienced, but really no one ever goes up to you and asks you these questions. So it's nice to be able to just have this big list or these topics to go through and like, oh, I actually have something I could share with someone. So Yeah, thanks for having me. And my first experience with racism that I really, really remember was when I started dating my husband. He was raised by American white family. So
Mhm.
um, he has a Hispanic father who necessarily didn't have a really good role in his life. So all of his family had really negative ideas about what Hispanic people were, what kind of families they were. And so when they found out that, oh, he's dating a Mexican girl, um, his grandmother had said, well, we have enough brown blood in this family already. And I was like, oh, she doesn't even know me yet. And so just hearing that, like, oh, she's Mexican, we already don't like her because, we had a bad experience with his father and his family. So I automatically became someone they didn't like and didn't approve of.
Right.
But once I met their family and once they found out who I was and got to know me better, that idea of like no more brown blood in the family just went out the window. So it was really kind of nice to see the change that people can have when you
Mhm.
experience that racism to actually seeing it turn around within your own life. Um, and so that was probably my first experience of real true someone does not like me because I'm Mexican.
Yeah, because of the color of your skin. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Josie. And not to jump off of the topic already, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself really quick?
Yes. So, well, I'm Josie Salazar, and I'm a preschool teacher here at Sprouts. It's one of my favorite jobs in the whole world. I love it. I love working with kids. Um, I'm originally from a really small town, Connell, um, where it was predominantly you were 50% Hispanic and 50% white, and a little bit of some Asian people in there. So that's where I grew up. And my family's from Texas, so not necessarily from Mexico, but my parents and their parents were born in Texas.
Awesome. Thanks, Josie.
Yep.
De Leon, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And we'll go ahead and have you answer that first question too.
Uh, my name is DeLeon Gauze. I am originally from Miami, Florida. I came up here to play football, and fun fact, I actually started off working after football in the preschool as well. So a lot of ties into the community, to our Hillspring community as well, and were influential in keeping me in the Tri-Cities for the past 7 years. And my start was here. Um, yeah, right now I'm working in social services with youth who have mental health and behavioral health challenges. To answer the question, my first experience that I can remember, and I kind of have two parts to this. The first experience that I can remember is traveling, going to a family reunion, and coming from Miami, going to maybe Georgia, which my mom is from a small town in Georgia, Arlington, Georgia, one traffic light. We stopped probably past Tallahassee, small town. It was to get food at a Waffle House. Great 24-hour place if you ever get a chance to go. Really good food and at a good price. And I remember like that was one of our memories of going. We would go to different Waffle Houses when we traveled. And we normally wouldn't stop in this specific area. It was like a remote town. And we got out and almost immediately coming into when I was young, maybe younger than 9 years old, coming into the restaurant, it was a field of everybody looked around, and we were the only people of color in the entire restaurant. Instantly looked at us. As we noticed coming back, it was some trucks with different flags on them. Few people stood up, The lady also just looked at us and said, are you sure you want to eat here? And by that time, my dad and my mom were very aware, and because they both have grown up in remote towns in the South. My mom being from Arlington, Georgia, my dad being from Mullins, South Carolina. They quickly decided that this probably wasn't the safest for myself and my sibling as well, and we left. But I remember that feeling as we drove to the next place that we can get something to eat closer to my mom's hometown. And really feeling like, man, there's some places where you're not welcome. You don't, what was that question about? Hadn't really felt it in my area. In Miami, it was predominantly African-American or Hispanic. So I kind of always felt in my neighborhood like I was welcome, but that brought a lot of questions. And the second thought that comes to mind is, growing up in the inner city community in Miami, Florida, in Miami-Dade County, I didn't notice it until I got older, but my high school, my elementaries were like this, pretty much the middle schools in that area. They threatened to close it down because it was considered an F school by the state standards. Under-resourced, had not been remodeled, maybe since my sister, who's 8 years older, even prior to her, lack of resources, educational opportunities. And when they threatened to close down the school, it made me think like, man, I know places in Miami Beach or Sunset, areas that we played sports against, that they were not going through these same challenges. You're talking about displacing 4,000 plus students. And where do they go? Then it made me look at my community. I can remember vividly, and I was talking to my dad about this, more liquor stores than libraries in the community. So for me, that was, as I got older and started being aware that it's not like that in every area of Miami, but it seems like the inner city communities where my friends grew up, or where I grew up in Miami-Dade, that seemed to be a mainstay, and that was our normal, but that was far from the norm of more affluent neighborhoods that, for many of the African-American families that I know, were not living in. And to me, that kind of awakened, like, what's the difference? Why resources are not allocated in this area? Why are communities kind of structured this way? So the systemic part of racism kind of made me aware a little bit more as I got older.
Yeah. And sounds like started forcing you to ask those questions, like, what's different about my school? What's different about my area? Yeah. Most
definitely. And it's funny you bring that up, because that what's different question is something that as a child, you begin to ask, having nieces and nephews now, maybe not seeing yourself reflected outside of entertainment on TV. What's different, And that's conversations that my sister has to have, or my brothers have to have, even at an early age, 5, 6 years old. What is different?
Yeah, and having those conversations. Thanks, DeLeon. Josh, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
Answer that first question for us.
No. So my name is Josh Guajardo. I am, I like to say I'm Jonna's husband, right? That's what I feel like I'm now. I'm Jonna's husband. I'm a dad of 2. Previously, I used to also work at, or get the chance to serve at Hillspring as with After School Matters. And now I'm currently serving in the Paso School District as migrant out of school youth recruiter and the parent liaison for the entire district. So my first experience with racism, and I didn't really know it was racism until, to be honest, I had a conversation with DeLeon here. He's one of my best friends, and we have a ton of conversations about a lot of different things. But growing up, I was involved in many youth sports, amateur sports, and it was, I grew up here in Tri-Cities, so in the amateur sports, we had a lot of, especially in Pasco, a lot of Latino. We had some, some white kids on our team, and then we had, I could think of like 3, African-American Black kids who were on our team. And I remember there was many instances where people would associate, and a lot of our teammates would associate like different things that they could do to, based on the color of their skin, so their athletic ability, many of these different things that they can bring to the table just simply because of what they looked like. And to me at the time, it was like, it's just a thing, you know what I mean? Like, oh, they said that, yeah, whatever, But it wasn't until all of this happened that I realized, like, man, I actually did probably experience some sort of racism at a younger age that I wasn't even aware of, which really brought, really makes me reflect a lot now too on a lot of my experiences and just some of the relationships that I've had and some of the relationships that I've seen people have based on the color of their skin. So that's probably my first experience. I started probably 7 years old. Was when I started with this group of guys, and yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And you spoke too to the witnessing part of it,
Yeah.
Many would say they've witnessed racism. Some may say they haven't, but they probably actually have if they were to reflect more on these situations, a very specific conversation, whatever. But that feeds into the next question. De Leon, I wanted to jump back to you a little bit because the next question is, while you were growing up, as you grew up, how was the issue of racism addressed? Maybe in your home, maybe in your school. I came back to you because you mentioned, your nieces and nephews now asking those questions. So for you, how was it addressed?
At a young age, for sure. Mom, as I mentioned, my mom grew up picking cotton in Georgia, and the son under a farm had 12 brothers and sisters, barely anything. School was an afterthought because she would literally go to help her mom and they barely got paid anything for the work. So the feeling of less than was already there. My dad, similar situation. He has experienced, just talking to him today, segregated bathrooms, restaurants, everything. So he's been to Japan, came back from the military, still not being able to give access to employment in the communication fields, which he was trained for in the military. Ended up having to drive trucks and leave his hometown. So they always knew it was present. And even as we progressed as a society in some regards, they knew that the plight would be a little bit more challenging. And at a young age, they would talk to me about, like, you have to take pride in who you are, even if it's not taught to you in schools or it's not reflected on the TV shows that you're watching. They would also tell me that you have to put yourself in positions to, remain safe, not only within your community, but know that, hey, it's some things that you're going to be judged harshly on or thought to be a threat. Experiencing that, my mom had experienced that firsthand or secondhand with her brother being sent away from Georgia to Miami at a young age after getting in a fight with a scuffle with a white peer, and they threatened to kill him. And so they were very aware as a male, as a person of color, we're going to talk to you from first grade and from when you can understand, barely can understand, that it's some things you got to do differently. It is some mannerisms, some behaviors you got to be aware of and know your surroundings. And trust isn't easily given because everybody doesn't have the same intentions for you. And you might not understand that now, but as you get older, you will experience some things that, it's unfortunate. And so they talked with me about it. They tried to instill in me a sense of confidence, but also knowing that, it's a real fear, real concern around that. And as you mentioned, my nieces and my nephew, who's 6 years old, they don't have an option not to look at this issue, because that can be their classmates. For me, that can be them. So they don't get to not see this and not be afraid of it or not hear about it. So even at this age, you know, my sister is talking to them about it. My mom, their grandmother, we try to instill hope and encouragement, but it is a real fear, a real concern for their safety, and trying to understand in this world, like, hey, it is some things that you have to worry about that you don't get a chance to look past, and we still have a long way to go. So I would say as early as around my nephew's age, 5 or 6, when I can understand and they can talk to me about certain things, they would explain, hey, it's a certain way you gotta maintain your behavior, or it's, you know, be aware, no matter who you're around, you know, always, you know, try to do the best you can, and especially when you're outside of our safety net.
Right. Outside of your familiar space, maybe. Yeah, I hear you. Just only can relate by way of my sister's family, because my sister and I both have little 1-year-old boys, but I'm married to a white man and my sister's married to a black man. So, I mean, just last week we talked about white privilege in this conversation. And I think about that because I have the privilege of Henry I will teach Henry as much as I possibly can about racism and the things he needs to know, but it's not the same as the way Jamie will teach Riddy and Jeffrey will teach Riddy about how he needs to act and he needs to be aware of and what he needs to know coming into the world, you know, and the things he could encounter. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Josie or Josh,
like, I remember as a kid, we weren't, my mom didn't like us to speak Spanish in public. She would always be like, talk English in public and Spanish is for home because people might think bad of you. And I never understood why speaking Spanish someone would think bad of us, or else she would say, oh, you better behave, be on your best behavior, because they're gonna say, oh, look at those crazy Mexican kids are running all over the place. So I always felt like we had to perform, behave, act a better way than our normal selves, because being a wild, crazy Mexican kid or speaking Spanish was exactly less than, or not something people would approve of. So that's something that just right now thinking about and hearing your conversation, DeLeon, is like, oh, how I remember always like having to be on point.
Yeah.
People would think bad because we're Mexican. It wasn't like, oh, those are just bratty kids, or those are kids that can speak 2 languages. It would be looked on negatively.
Yeah. And that you were held to, it sounds like both of you had the experience of being held to really high expectations because of these things that you were taught.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, like growing, I mean, it's not long ago that I feel like I was even in high school, college, and I feel like what my classmates did was they were really good at, they were really aware. So I never, like, I'm listening to these stories, and I know, we've spoken about this, but I'm listening to these stories and I'm like, I don't feel like I have experienced it to that to that magnitude. Like DeLeon said, like, he's had these experiences, and even Josie, like, hearing to have to speak, feeling like you always have to perform to a certain level. But what and I'm going to go back to how is it addressed? I think today, what a lot of like my peers have shown me is it's okay to step up and stand up for what you believe in. And I think for people like me, who, I mean, even though being Latino, I feel like I still lived a very, I don't know, just being here in Tri-Cities too, I feel like we do a really, fairly good job of, inclusion and stuff like that. But addressing it and being aware, I feel like go hand in hand. And that's what, I mean, I'd say even since this whole, since Black Lives Matter started, and, since it all got brought to the forefront, it really challenged me personally to be uncomfortable and to try to put myself in, a lot of times in those situations, so that we can address them, so that we can address these issues head on. Because I feel like that's exactly what's happening here, right? I mean, a lot of times people won't experience, even people like me of color, they won't experience it. I mean, I don't want to say I won't experience it, but I haven't, I would say, to the magnitude of some of your guys' situations. But I feel like it's definitely in some capacities being addressed. I'm excited about that. I think we still have a lot of room to grow. But I just say that simply because it's like I have a completely different perspective, or not perspective, but a experience with racism. And honestly, what's happening now is it's like shattering my reality, if I could just put it that way. Because you hear about it, you think it's, you're like, oh yeah, racism's real, but not until, you have buddies who are like, no, I've been through this, like I've seen this, and you're forced to wrestle with it and be like, no, yeah, this is a real thing. Like people have really gone through it. I think that's what's really pushed, at least me and the people around me to address it. So
yeah.
And if I can, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, Josh, I would also add that, sometimes even within the fear, or I guess concerns of a family, even if it wasn't directly addressed, me having an opportunity to be part of your family as well. I know sometimes that is, I can speak for my mom. I know your mom cares for you deeply. It's a real concern that a mother can have, that a father can have, that they have this watchful eye, knowing that, hey, you may be addressed a little bit differently. You may be looked at a little bit differently. And it sounds like, and knowing your parents, they did an awesome job at being able to keep you in a space where you didn't have to directly experience that as well, but indirectly, it can definitely be present. And the fears and the concerns on the backs of parents and grandparents that have gone through those things, that is also very real. That's a very big part of things. They sometimes hover over us as our safety net, so we don't have to directly experience it.
Exactly. And then I think, you hit it perfectly. I mean, like you said, I feel like my parents did a great job of saying, you know what, doing a really good job of protecting me. And, I feel like nowadays you can't hide from it, right? I mean, I feel like it's there, it's present, it's relevant. And I think it's good. I think it's really good that it causes that, because it causes that little bit of anxiety, that little bit of like, man, this is real life. Like, I can't believe there's, this actually exists. It's reality shattering, but I mean, more than anybody, it's challenged me and it's pushed me in a lot of ways. And sorry, I know we were connecting it with the dressing or whatever, but I mean, I think it's,
I will say there's a bunch of comments on Facebook saying, thank you guys so much for sharing your stories and talking about it. Tammy did make an interesting point I wanted to bring out, which is, she said, one of the most of color, particularly Black men, don't have the option of not thinking about that aspect of their identity, whereas I do, right? Or whatever. So
the white privilege part that separates us from being able to say that same thing. I was just gonna say, Josh, I think something you said is really important too for many of us here, online, across the country, that I would argue maybe it's not a really bad thing for our realities to be shattered on some level, to have our eyes open. Some of us are having our eyes open wider. Some of us are having our eyes open maybe for the first time to some of what's going on, but not an easy thing, but an important,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we're about halfway done already, so I'm going to jump ahead to the next question. And we're kind of jumping over to one of our big topics here, but bear with me on this long question and then we'll answer it. So in response to George Floyd's death, Governor Cuomo of New York referenced the instance of police brutality that Rodney King encountered in 1991. So this is the event that spurred the LA riots, okay? So he said, this was a quote from, I think, May of this year. He said, "The names change, but the color doesn't. And that is the painful reality of this whole situation. And it's not just 30 years, it's this nation's history of discrimination and racism dating back hundreds of years." So he says, the names change, but the color doesn't. And that's the painful reality of the situation. So I'll open this up to any of the three of you, but what does that statement mean to you? What do you think of when you hear that?
I'll start off. It's an array of emotion because I identify with it in so many ways. To give a reference point, when I see situations like that, and it was being from Florida, it's a guy in Florida that, you know, I think it was some substances that he was involved in and ended up having like almost a cannibalistic outburst. And he was taken in. You know, a guy walked into a church and, you know, massacred, and he was taken in. Or you know, and justice will go through the justice proceedings. A kid out in Portland, a coach lovingly was able to embrace him and disarm him before any other people could be hurt. But we continuously see, you know, folks, African American, Hispanic folks that may be not given that same opportunity in different circumstances. And it begs the question, why? And then when you go back into the history and you understand that, you know, it's been people that's been massacred or brutally hurt, brutally neglected and abused, the connections seem to be the same. So identify with that. And it's you run through everything from frustration to anger, to fear, to sadness. And I think sometimes even the worst of all, almost an indifferent feeling. Like, oh, it's happening again. Growing up in my community, seeing death from folks who could be me or my brothers or my cousins, that's not so unfamiliar.
Right.
So as a coping mechanism, you begin to say, I have no other explanation for this, but to look at it, to try not to be enraged and to keep going on. And it's almost a sense of indifference when it should hurt. It should be sorrow. It should be pain. Whether it's someone from the same background as, you know, Trevor or you, like anyone, we should be in pain anytime life is lost. Mm-hmm. But it seems to happen at a disproportionate rate, and it seems to affect communities a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's something that I have to work on, is that reflection of you should feel that pain each and every time and be called to action, whatever that action is. Awareness, communicating with officials, doing things to better your community, because but it's a sadness, and it's a thread, and it's a cycle. It's a history, a terrible tradition or terrible history that we sometimes discredit or act like it didn't happen. And I think that's the sadness that and the hurt that folks feel when it's not acknowledged. So for me, it is, I can identify with that, and I applaud him for having the courage to stand and say it as honestly, as openly, and to the community and to the country, you know, to be able to address that, because I think we have to stand flat-footed, honestly, and acknowledge that this is happening, and it's happening at, you know, rates that we can't deny. So I agree with it, and I'm saddened by it. I'm hurt, as I mentioned, that you know, my nephew has to ask about those questions. My mom calls me and, you know, I just want to make sure you're all right. I've been able to take care of myself in a number of situations, but I, I know you don't necessarily have to be doing the wrong thing for things to happen to you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's a fear as a mom that I don't know, but she has for me, even if I'm sometimes naive not to see it for myself, has it for her nephews and her cousins having a big family. So I think that's a very real statement. And I think it's worth exploring. It's worth looking into. It's worth looking at the names. So many that it's hard to count. The Trayvon Martins, the Ahmaud Arbery, like Breonna Taylor, Samir Wright, like all you go down the list and it starts to seem like, hey, this is what I've heard before. Why is this going on continuously? That's my reflection on it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And like you said, the array of emotions that you experience. I think it's important for anybody to hear, experiencing the feeling of indifference. Like this is just something that happens, but that we can't stop there, and continuing past that. Josie, how about you?
I agree also. I think I was like maybe 10 years old when Rodney King, that stuff was going down. But I have family members that have been in jail, have been in prison. And so when I saw that police brutality on TV, it kind of made me think of like, is that how people get arrested? Because that's how my uncles were treated or my cousins were treated. And it's scary to think that happens in that way. And it's fearful. It puts a bad feeling in your stomach, that like tightness of like uncomfortable, like, wow, that can happen to my nephews, that can happen to my uncle. I mean, we hope it doesn't, but it's possible, and it's scary. It's very scary.
Yeah. And in that, talking about seeing the video, how many of us watched the video of George Floyd's death? And Josh, I'll just hop over to you because you've kind of shared all that this has brought up for you. But how has his death affected you as it's affecting so many?
You know what? It's fine. It's affected me in a lot. Again, and I'm gonna go back to it really shattered my reality. In terms of like, I sat through, what was it? It was almost 9. I think it was 9 minutes of that, that video, and it broke my heart because in my opinion, it was wrong. Like everything about it was just, wrong. And it affected me because it was like you said, I have friends. I have friends who, are Black, and it's just hard to think, we always have like this shade of like, well, you hear it happens, but you don't really see it happen. And I was forced to see it happen. And for me, that was a tough pill to swallow, but then it really brought me to I'm going to tie this a little bit back to what Delion said, that kind of that, for like, I feel like for Black people, it's just something, it's something that they, that we feel like, or Delion, go back to like, you were saying that it's almost like a norm, like, it's a constant worry, right? It's just a constant worry of like, this can happen to me. And I think for people like me, what it forced us to do was, who I'm not Black, I'm Latino, so but it forced me to really sit there and like recognize that the more I know, like now that I know this happens, now I'm responsible for more. And that like, it made me more responsible to speak out against it, to inform myself of, about racism and about, many different aspects about it. And that's really what it does, is it, when it shatters your reality and the more information that the more that is going on, it forced me to really just be aware, I guess. Be aware and have a responsibility now. You know, we have a responsibility with what we know, and to protect, you know, our brothers and sisters in Christ. And yeah, that's really what the death did to me. Shattered my reality and made me recognize that, hey, this is real. Now you're responsible for making, you know, ensuring that God's people are treated like God's people. And yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
think
think you're alone in that at all. Like, I really think a lot of people feel the same way. And I mean, I could say that too, that really opened my eyes to where it's like, it doesn't just happen in LA, or it doesn't just happen, you know, Mexico, all these bad things, police brutality. So I think I agree with you too. It definitely opened a lot of our eyes being in this nice Tri-Cities area where we live, where we're kind of sheltered a little bit from, you know, the extreme violence. But yeah, it does kind of give you a huge wake up call for our young kids.
yeah, absolutely a wake up call. And Josh, I love what you said. I'm blanking on who said this quote, but something along the lines of, once you know better, do better.
Yeah.
You know, we might be critical of people who don't seem to be aware of racism and systemic racism, but that's why I love what you said. We all have a responsibility to listen to one another and these experiences that different people have had, to educate ourselves on the history, like De Leon mentioned, years and years back, 30 years ago, 100 years ago. And I think it's one of those things that sounds simple. People think, oh, I'm just one person. What does me doing something or learning something about racism do? But it does matter. And I mean, I think about, you know, raising kids. What am I teaching them? You know, for me, George Floyd's death, I think, affected me in that way too, because I would never say I've been racist or I haven't known racism exist. You know, I grew up in this community with a large Hispanic population and kind of witnessed racism more towards that group. But his death and this whole our country kind of falling on its knees, it's like there's more that I can do than just know that it's out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most definitely, Lindsay, it brings to mind Freedom Writers is a movie that inspires me to this day. I'll go back to it. And Erin Gruwell, who she connected with a group of students, not because she understood their heritage background, but because she was open to listening, learning, and loving them. And because of that, those students went on to make impacts that, you know, is still going on. You know, a book, a movie, they were able to see outside of the neighborhoods that they grew up. They were able to see outside of maybe feeling less than, you know, people that were not of color and that they were exposed to. They were able to connect to education where people in the school didn't think they were worthy of it. And so I think it's a role that we all can play, and we may not all be teachers, social workers, pastors, but we all can listen and grow. Another person that inspires me, Father Greg Boyle. He's the founder of Homeboy Industries. He would say, I've learned love, compassion, hope from gang members, because they taught me all of the essence of the Holy Spirit and things worth learning in life. He says I'm a white middle-aged man who grew up in middle class. I didn't go through the same experiences, but because they invited me, because we were open to learn from one another, I become saved in the process. I think of a quote that kind of, it leads me to this day is, let's stand in awe of a person's journey instead of in judgment of what they have to carry. And I think as movements go around and we see struggles, we see the hurt, we see young people act out, we see a array of emotion. We oftentimes stand in judgment of how they carry their pain instead of in awe of the fact that they're still here in the first place. I am a witness of carrying pain, of seeing things, the history of my mom and my dad going through, their grandparents going through, experiencing slavery. We don't sometimes realize that trauma can extend into the DNA of your children. So if someone had been a victim of, whether it be sexual violence, physical violence, any type of trauma, that can potentially, transfer into your children's DNA. So people experiencing pain, experiencing isolation, depression, anxiety, or real fear in this time, especially folks of color who can identify with maybe the George Floyds or have seen this happen within their own family. I think it is worth looking at not how they're expressing the pain exactly, but what is behind that? What is going on to cause this level of fear, this level of frustration, this level of inferior complex sometimes? Our children growing up not seeing themselves in the same light or like they have the same opportunity. I think it's worth diving into that. And you bring up a great point, educating yourself. I go back to Erin Gruwell and Father Greg Boyle. He learned Spanish, and not because he had to, but because he felt in relationship, in kinship with the folks in his community. How often do we ask people to assimilate to what's comfortable to us? Because we may not have to step into their reality, that discomfort. And so I really appreciate you saying that, because it is an education that we can go through, an awareness, and we can seek to listen and learn and understand that, yeah, you may not agree with the way I express my pain, but we have to acknowledge first that this pain is very real and very valid. And through that, healing can begin for both of us. We learn together, we grow together. So I think, sometimes we think, oh, I can't make a difference, or I'm not from this specific community. That's not my culture. I won't be accepted. Those are a few examples, but it's so many more examples of how we take steps. We educate our children. We talk to our family members who have views that may be dismissive. All of those are great steps. Some people, resources. It's a wide array of steps that we can take, even within our own context, our own circle. And it starts with listening. It starts with being uncomfortable. It starts with educating ourselves and realizing that, hey, this is a real fear. This is a real pain. This is a real history of persecution. Let's acknowledge that. And now let's do differently.
Yeah. You're back. Lindsay froze for a second there. So
Sorry, disappeared. I'm like just ready to be like, yes, it's so good. Thank you for sharing all of that. And then poof, I was gone.
there's been a bunch of comments on Facebook about agreeing with that. Terry was saying a witness of carrying pain, as you said, De Leon, carrying trauma into your DNA. So, yeah.
Yeah. And De Leon, I was just going to ask you, I missed the very end of what you said, but just to say one more time that quote, what was that quote? May we stand in awe rather than
stand in awe of what folks have to carry instead of in judgment of the way they carry it. And it applies to so many. We talk about Christ, brothers and sisters in Christ. And one thing I remember reflecting with Brian, you come as you are. We don't tell people, well, you get saved and then you can enter the church. And I think it's understanding and being able to meet people where they're at and really understand that, hey, we got a community of brothers and sisters that are hurting. I can stand back and look at the way they're doing it and be really frustrated, really upset about that. Or I can begin to educate, acknowledge that, man, it's been a history of pain and trauma. And the fact that you made it this far is a miracle. How can we heal together? That's what real healing, I believe, takes place. Let me listen so you can have a voice if you felt voiceless before.
Yeah.
So sorry, I'm going on.
No, it's good. It's good. I think you said a lot of really important things, and speaking from your own experience, but also things that anyone can and should be doing. We are nearing the end of our time, so I do want to move on to the last question, which if each of you has time to answer, what have you done or what can you do to combat racism? And I just want to say my piece really quickly, I kind of said already, but just that we each have something we can do, that in reflecting on this whole season since George Floyd's death, and even on this question that I was sent, it's like, what have I done? I can't say. I hope I can say I've been kind to people, but have I taken any action, not only to acknowledge it, but to do something about it? So I've been inspired in that way to take a deeper look at that and find those call to actions that you talked about, Dalian. But Josh, what about you?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think, just reading that really is somewhat convicting, right? Like, we always think like, we always think that, well, at least for me, and I know I've had this conversation with Dalian several times as well, like, yeah, we all want to do something, right? But I think, like Dalian said, the first step is, at least for me, is really getting myself, informing myself, really getting my heart really in a place to where I'm willing to move, if that makes sense. Because I think a lot of times it can be, we can say we're going to move, or we're going to say like, hey, you know what? Yeah, we're going to combat racism. We're going to do this, and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. But it's a different thing to talk about it than to prepare your heart to actually do it. And that's one thing that especially in this season, that I've had to do, because I'll be honest, I'm this person. I will hop on my phone. I will scroll down social media. I will see that this is happening, and I will see everybody's, response, like, hey, George Floyd's death, racism is real. These are the statistics behind it. And it's really easy for me to just scroll one time and forget about it. And what I've really done in this season is sit in it and realize, like, no, I can't hide from it, because the more I hide from it, the more it's just like, it's one of those things, again, where we talk about it, but I don't do anything about it. So really informing myself, learning the Breonna Taylor story, learning the George Floyd story, like I said, just reading more on what's actually happening than taking social media's stories at face value. Because I think it's just one of those things that just gets me like, you know what? And who even knows nowadays, right? Like, at least for me, I'm like, okay. And I don't know if it's just like, you can read the comments, it's like, oh, agenda this, agenda that, agenda this. But it's like, no, there's real people behind this, and, racism is real. So what can I do to prepare myself? And for me, it's to prepare myself to move, which means making myself really uncomfortable. And Dalian, more than anybody, knows this. I love to be comfortable. Like, if I don't have to read it, I won't. And that's just really the season that I'm in, is like, no, we have to get uncomfortable about this. And I believe, God will use that in you know, many ways will present itself, I'm sure, but really preparing my heart in this season has been big, for me at least.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Don't we all love to be comfortable? Yeah, we're all guilty of that. I am at least. Josie, how about you?
Well, educating yourself absolutely is number one. Take the time to actually read about history and what's going on in the world. Another thing is, that uncomfortable situation. Go out and meet people, get to know people, because that is by far the best way you can be like, wow, my idea about you or this race is totally different. Once you actually get to know someone, we have so many things in common with each other, from the food we eat to the TV we like to watch. So for me, my step forward is say hi to your neighbor, get to know them. Just kind of walk into a room where you don't know anyone, walk into a room where everyone is a different race or a different religion or has a different job than you do, and get to know people. And I feel that's going to help bridge these negative vibes between people who are just like getting to know one another.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an approachable step, right? If we allow ourselves to maybe be a little uncomfortable, that's a totally approachable step.
Yeah, because usually you go somewhere where like you're comfortable, where I know that person, or he works where I work, or just kind of step out of the box and think of other people as, how can I get to know you, and what do we have in common? How can I call you my friend?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Josie. How about you, De Leon?
You're muted there.
There you go.
Ready? All right. A few steps that I have taken already has been, definitely resources. I know from things like funeral costs and for George Floyd, or donating to our families, scholarship fund for his daughter. Just being aware, I've also stood in solidarity at some of the local just protests and things like that. Just in what was amazing to me is seeing the young people around, which, as Josh and Brian knows, like that's been a part of my calling, I would say. I've learned just as much as from the young people here as anywhere. And having the opportunity to work in the Boys and Girls Club, and come up with a vision around a nonprofit and things like that, still working with some of the young adults from all different backgrounds, and being able to help them understand and process through, what does this mean? We have conversations. What does this mean for your kids? Some of them are young parents, single parents. Some of them are struggling in different socioeconomic status. So we continue to talk about this and how we can spread hope and love, and really just grow together. And what does that mean? Because I feel like they ultimately inspire me, just as if my nephew and my niece was here. I get to pour into their lives and build them up, and to have the courage, to have the inspiration, to have the hope, to know that we will move forward and that we will continue to impact change. And so I tend to pour my heart into that, and I oftentimes think when I'm a bit fearful to move, because I don't want to sit up here and talk like I make all of the steps. And Josh will know sometimes I'm passionate even about our youth and our families that are undocumented, and I oftentimes don't feel like I'm doing the next steps. I've been a part of those conversations with our youth that have maybe family members deported. And I oftentimes, when I'm teetering between what do I even have a role here? What is my role? I put myself in, that's me. That's my niece. That's my nephew. It's no separation. And that gives me the courage that even when it's not there, like not only is this God's, I believe God gives us that yearning in our heart when we see somebody struggling. I believe that, man, if we truly believe we're family, if it impacts, you, Lindsay, it impacts me, in some way, form, or fashion. My step may just be educating myself and talking with my family about it, and so that we can make better steps. Or it could be, hey, affecting things systemically, and how we make that, or resources. If I have something to share or somebody to direct in that way, so being a bridge. So for me, it's been connecting with young people, listening to the hurts, listening to the fears, trying to pour that into my family, my nieces and nephews as well too. Finding a place of peace and prayer as well too, being there, being open to hearing tough things that sometimes I don't even want to hear. But even at work, hearing different views and being able to say, you know what, if I want to be transparent and open, I gotta be open to hearing things that maybe I'm not well versed in, or I feel differently about as well. So that's been my call to action so far, and I look forward to continuing growing in and stepping into what other call do I have on a bigger scale, or just interacting with the people on my day-to-day circle and beyond. So.
Yeah. Well, there's been a bunch of comments on Facebook as well, and kind of summed up in many ways what you guys are talking about really just learning to hear each other, to be educated. Kind of along those lines, we did have a question on YouTube about, what was that movie that you had mentioned, DeLeon, I think, and they also suggested Harriet too, the movie Harriet. But I think you had mentioned a movie that you said would be Freedom
Riders.
Freedom Riders.
Yep.
So that we'll throw that out for everybody else. But anyway, Lindsay.
I was just going to say thank you to all three of you for sharing those steps that you've taken or want to take, because, we're all listening, and there's something in each one of those, in each one of those that we can do ourselves. So, time, passing it back to you or Brian to close.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, there again, thank you. 2 weeks from now, we'll definitely be having, answering some of the questions that have come in. If you want to email me, the email address is down there. It'll help us compile a list of questions, and we'll do that anonymously. As well as next week, Brian and I will be talking about with some of our other friends from a theological perspective, and what does this mean for our churches, and what do we do with it? So we hope that you tune in and join us for that. With that, Brian, do you have any closing words and close us in prayer to go?
I want to thank everyone. This was just outstanding, and I am proud of all of you. I've been able to be on staff with all of you over the years, and just what a tremendous blessing that you've been able to share for our gathered community. Let's have a prayer. Lord, I thank you for this evening. Help this to be seeds that grow and grow and grow, that your kingdom might be experienced because of this conversation, and that we might be able to peer into just the depth of beauty of your creation and your vision for the kingdom that is coming. In your son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you to all those who are listening out there on Facebook and YouTube. Hopefully we'll see you next week. And thank you, Josie, Josh, Lindsay, DeLeon, for joining us tonight. Have a great evening. We'll see you around.